What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning show set and finds himself ambushed by a host who seems more interested in stirring controversy than conducting an interview? It only took 26 seconds for Savannah Guthrie to turn what should have been a lighthearted promotional appearance into an absolute disaster that would leave her co-host speechless and Samuel L. Jackson storming off the set in disgust. The morning started like any other at the Today Show studio in New York City. Samuel L. Jackson arrived on set wearing his signature style, a black leather jacket, and his trademark cap, ready to discuss his latest film project. The energy in the studio felt normal at first. Hoda Kotb sat to Savannah's right, her usual warm smile greeting the legendary actor. Craig Melvin occupied the chair next to Hoda, and Al Roker stood near the weather screen, occasionally glancing over at the interview setup. As Samuel settled into the guest chair, the cameras rolled and Savannah opened with what seemed like a standard greeting. "Samuel L. Jackson, welcome back to Today. It's always great to have you here." Samuel nodded graciously. "Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure." But then something shifted in Savannah's demeanor. Her smile took on an edge that seemed almost confrontational. "So, let's talk about your new movie. But first, I think we need to address something that a lot of people have been talking about." Samuel's expression remained calm, but you could see a flicker of confusion cross his face. "Sure, what's that?" Savannah leaned forward, her voice taking on a tone that felt more like an interrogation than an interview. "There's been some discussion online about whether your recent film choices have been, how should I put this, less prestigious than your earlier work. Some critics are saying you're just chasing paychecks now instead of artistic merit." The studio went quiet. You could feel the tension. Immediately. Hoda's smile faltered, and she glanced nervously at Craig, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Al Roker stopped what he was doing entirely, turning to watch the exchange with visible concern. Samuel took a breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "That's an interesting way to start an interview, Savannah. I came here to talk about a project I'm passionate about, not to defend my entire career to you." But Savannah didn't back down. In fact, she doubled down with an even more aggressive follow-up. "I'm just saying what people are thinking. You've done some great work, obviously, but lately it seems like you'll take any role that pays well. Don't you think audiences deserve better from someone with your talent?" Hoda interjected quickly, trying to smooth things over. "Savannah, I think what Samuel has done throughout his career speaks for itself. He's given us so many incredible performances." Savannah waved her hand dismissively at Hoda. "I'm asking the questions here, Hoda. I think our viewers want honesty, not softball questions." Samuel's jaw tightened. His voice remained steady, but you could hear the frustration building. "Honesty is fine. Disrespect is something else entirely. I've been making films for decades, and I choose projects based on a lot of factors. The idea that I need to justify my choices to you or anyone else is pretty insulting." Craig Melvin tried to redirect the conversation. "Samuel, tell us about the new film. What drew you to this particular role?" Before Samuel could answer, Savannah cut back in. "Wait, I'm not finished, Samuel. There's also been talk about your attitude on set. Multiple sources have said you can be difficult to work with. Is that something you'd like to address?" The look on Samuel's face changed completely. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was anger, barely contained. "Sources? What sources? You're going to sit here on national television and accuse me of being difficult based on unnamed sources?" Al Roker walked over from the weather area, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. "Hey, maybe we should take a quick break and reset here." Savannah ignored Al completely, her focus locked on Samuel. "I'm just reporting what's been said. If it's not true, this is your chance to set the record straight. But getting defensive doesn't really help your case, does it?" Samuel stood up slowly, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. His voice was measured but intense. "Getting defensive? You invite me onto your show under the pretense of a normal interview, then you attack my career choices and my professionalism based on gossip, and you think I'm being defensive?" Hoda reached out as if to calm the situation. "Samuel, please, I apologize for how this has gone. This isn't how we usually conduct interviews." Savannah shot Hoda a sharp look. "Speak for yourself. I'm trying to ask the tough questions that viewers actually care about. Someone has to hold celebrities accountable." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression one of complete disbelief. "Accountable? Accountable for what exactly? For working? For taking roles in films? Is that what you think requires accountability?" Savannah pressed on, seemingly oblivious to how badly this was going. For the choices you make, for the quality of work you put out there. People look up to you, Samuel. They expect better. Samuel's voice rose slightly. And who made you the judge of what's better? You sit here every morning reading from a teleprompter and doing puff pieces about cooking and fashion, and suddenly you're qualified to critique my artistic choices? Hoda winced visibly at Samuel's words, not because they were wrong, but because they were true and brutal. Craig shifted in his seat again, clearly wishing he could be anywhere else. Savannah's face flushed red. That's completely uncalled for. I'm a professional journalist. Samuel leaned forward now, his voice sharp. Then act like one. A professional journalist does research, asks informed questions, and treats their guests with respect. What you're doing right now? This isn't journalism. This is you trying to create a viral moment at my expense. Al Roker moved closer to the interview area, his expression grave. Savannah, seriously, this needs to stop right now. But Savannah waved him off too. I don't need you all protecting him. He's a grown man who can handle a difficult conversation. Samuel shook his head in disbelief. Tough questions? You call this tough questions? This is ambush journalism at its worst. You don't know anything about me, my work ethic, or why I choose the projects I do. You're sitting up there in your chair making judgments about my career like you have any idea what it takes to do what I do. Craig stood up now too, trying to physically position himself between the mounting conflict. Listen, everyone, let's just calm down for a second. Samuel, we have a lot of respect for you and your work. But Samuel wasn't interested in Craig's mediation. His attention stayed fixed on Savannah. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't feel like respect. It feels like you brought me here to tear me down for ratings. You scheduled this interview, you knew what film I was promoting, and instead of talking about that, you decided to make this about tearing down my reputation. Savannah leaned back in her chair with an expression that could only be described as smug. I'm simply asking questions that reflect what people are saying online and in the media. If you have a problem with that, maybe you should think about the choices that led to people saying these things. Hoda closed her eyes briefly, as if trying to will this nightmare to end. Savannah, please, this is not okay. Savannah ignored her completely and continued. You've been in how many movies in the last 3 years alone? 10? 15? Some people might call that dedicated. Others might call it desperate. The gasp from Hoda was audible. Craig stood up partially from his chair, his mouth opening to object, but Samuel held up a hand to stop him. Samuel's voice went quiet, which somehow made it even more powerful. Desperate? You think I'm desperate? Let me tell you about desperation. Desperation is attacking a guest on live television because your ratings are slipping. Desperation is manufacturing conflict where none exists because you think that's what modern television requires. I'm not desperate. I'm successful. I'm working. I'm doing what I love. What are you doing besides trying to tear people down? Savannah's face went from red to almost purple. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk. How dare you question my career? I've won awards. I've interviewed presidents. I've broken major stories. Samuel's response was measured but cutting. And yet here you are, using your platform to attack someone who came here in good faith. That tells me everything I need to know about where your career is really at. Al Roker stepped fully into the interview space now. Okay, that's enough from both sides. Let's all take a breath. But Savannah wasn't done. Her voice took on a mocking tone that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. Oh, please. You're an actor who gets paid millions of dollars to pretend for a living. You put on costumes and say lines someone else wrote. I think you can handle a few direct questions without throwing a tantrum like a spoiled child. The studio fell into stunned silence. Hoda's mouth dropped open in complete shock. Craig looked at Savannah with an expression of utter disbelief. Even Al Roker seemed frozen, unable to believe what he just heard. Several crew members in the background stopped what they were doing entirely, their faces showing pure astonishment at what their host had just said. Samuel's voice went quiet, which somehow made it even more powerful. A tantrum? You think this is a tantrum? Let me tell you something. I've worked in this industry for over 40 years. I've earned every bit of success I've had. I've treated people with respect and dignity, from the biggest directors to the crew members setting up lights. And I come onto your show expecting a professional conversation, and instead I get insulted and belittled by someone who thinks her morning show hosting gig gives her the right to judge a lifetime of work. Savannah crossed her arms, her face set in stubborn defiance. I have every right to ask challenging questions. That's my job. Samuel pointed at her, his voice rising now. Your job is to conduct interviews, not to attack your guests. There's a difference between challenging questions and being deliberately provocative for no reason other than to create drama. You want to know what's difficult? Sitting here being disrespected by someone who clearly has an agenda. Hoda tried again, her voice almost pleading. Samuel, we value having you here. Savannah, maybe we should move on to discussing the actual film. Savannah's response showed she had learned nothing from the escalating situation. I'll decide when we move on. Hoda, Samuel, if you can't handle a real conversation, maybe you're not as professional as you claim to be. That was it. That was the moment. Samuel L. Jackson, one of the most successful and respected actors in Hollywood history, reached up and unclipped his microphone. The small sound of the clip releasing echoed through the now silent studio. I'm done here, Samuel said, his voice carrying absolute finality. I came here as a guest to promote a film that I and a lot of other people worked very hard on. But I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag because you decided today was the day you wanted to prove how tough you are. Craig stood up completely now. Samuel, please, don't go. We can fix this. Samuel looked at Craig, and his voice softened just slightly. Craig, I appreciate that. You, Hoda, Al, you all seem like good people, but I can't stay here. I won't stay here and be disrespected like this. Al Roker stepped forward, his weatherman's usual cheerful demeanor replaced with genuine concern. Samuel, I apologize for how this went. This isn't who we are. Samuel nodded at Al. I believe you, but he gestured toward Savannah without looking at her. She made it clear what she thinks of me and my work. I have too much respect for myself to sit here any longer. Savannah, incredibly, still didn't back down. So you're just going to run away when things get a little uncomfortable? Samuel finally turned back to face her directly. His voice was ice cold. Uncomfortable? You don't understand anything. I've dealt with uncomfortable. I've dealt with real challenges and real adversity in my life and career. This isn't uncomfortable. This is unprofessional, disrespectful, and completely unnecessary. You wanted to make a moment for yourself. Congratulations. You got it. But you lost a guest and whatever credibility you thought you had in the process. Hoda was standing now too, and you could see tears forming in her eyes. Samuel, I'm so sorry. This should never have happened. Samuel's expression softened when he looked at Hoda. Hoda, you have nothing to apologize for. You tried to stop this. You all did, except for her. He grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I hope you all have a good rest of your show. As Samuel turned to walk off the set, Savannah called after him. You're making a huge mistake walking out like this. Samuel stopped and turned back one last time. The only mistake made here today was me trusting that I'd be treated with basic respect. You want to talk about mistakes? Look in the mirror. Craig moved quickly, following Samuel toward the exit. Samuel, wait, please. But Samuel kept walking, his stride confident and determined. Craig caught up to him just off camera, and while viewers couldn't hear the exchange, you could see Craig apologizing profusely, his hands gesturing in a pleading manner. Samuel placed a hand on Craig's shoulder, said something brief, and continued toward the exit. Back on set, the remaining hosts stood in various states of shock and dismay. Al Roker was shaking his head slowly, his hands on his hips in a posture of complete disappointment. Hoda had her hand over her mouth, clearly upset, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Craig returned to the set looking devastated, his usual composed demeanor completely shattered. Savannah sat in her chair, her arms still crossed, a defiant look on her face that suggested she still didn't understand the gravity of what had just happened. Well, I guess some people can't handle honest journalism. The response from her co-host was immediate and fierce. Hoda turned to her sharply, her voice shaking with emotion. Honest journalism? Savannah, that wasn't journalism. That was an attack. You attacked a guest for no reason. You insulted his profession, you questioned his integrity, and you did it all with this attitude like you were somehow doing the world a favor. Craig nodded in agreement, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. What were you thinking? That's Samuel L. Jackson. He's a legend, and you treated him like he was some controversial figure who deserved to be grilled. He came here to talk about his movie, and you turned it into a personal attack. Al walked back to the main set area, his usual jovial nature completely absent. His voice was heavy with disappointment. That was painful to watch. I've been on this show a long time, and I've never seen a guest treated like that. Never. We're supposed to make people feel welcome here. We're supposed to have conversations, not confrontations. Savannah finally seemed to realize she wasn't getting support from anyone. Her voice lost some of its edge, but retained defensiveness. I was trying to ask the questions people want answered. I was. Trying to do real journalism instead of just lobbing softballs. Hoda's voice was firm, her anger barely contained. No one wanted those questions answered because they weren't real questions. They were accusations wrapped up as questions. There's a huge difference, and if you can't see that, then we have a serious problem. Craig ran his hand over his face, clearly trying to process what had just occurred. Do you realize what you've done? We've probably lost any chance of having him back. And worse, you embarrassed him and us on live television. You made us all look bad. Every single person on this set. Savannah finally seemed to realize she wasn't getting support from anyone. I was trying to ask the questions people want answered. Hoda's voice was firm. No one wanted those questions answered because they weren't real questions. They were accusations wrapped up as questions. There's a huge difference. Craig ran his hand over his face, clearly trying to process what had just occurred. Do you realize what you've done? We've probably lost any chance of having him back. And worse, you embarrassed him and us on live television. Savannah's defiance started to crack just slightly. I was doing my job. I was asking hard questions. Al shook his head again, his voice rising with frustration. Your job is to make guests feel welcome and have interesting conversations. Your job isn't to ambush people and create hostile confrontations. Your job definitely isn't to insult someone's entire profession and call them spoiled. Hoda wiped at her eyes, composing herself but still visibly upset. You called acting, pretending. You dismissed everything he's accomplished. Do you have any idea how many people would kill to have the career he's had? How many actors struggle their entire lives and never achieve a fraction of what he's done? Craig leaned against the desk, his voice weary but angry. And you did it with this smirk on your face like you were enjoying it. Like hurting him was entertainment for you. Savannah's voice rose defensively. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to have a real conversation. Al threw his hands up in exasperation. A real conversation? Savannah, you were attacking him from the moment he sat down. There was no conversation. There was you making accusations and him defending himself against things that weren't even true. The camera operators and crew members stood silently, unsure of what to do. Several of them had worked with Samuel on previous appearances and clearly felt terrible about what had happened. The producers in the control room were likely scrambling to figure out how to proceed with the rest of the show. The energy in the studio had gone from normal morning television to something dark and uncomfortable. Hoda wiped at her eyes, composing herself. We need to address this with viewers. We can't just pretend that didn't happen. We owe them an explanation, and more importantly, we owe Samuel an apology. Craig agreed immediately. Absolutely, we owe the audience and Samuel an acknowledgement of how badly that went. This can't just be swept under the rug. Savannah finally uncrossed her arms, but her tone still carried defensiveness. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? Fine. I'm sorry it didn't go well. Hoda looked at her with an expression of disbelief. That's not an apology. That's you being sorry you got caught. There's a difference. A real apology would be acknowledging that what you did was wrong, not just that it didn't go well. Al spoke up, his voice sad but firm. Samuel L. Jackson has been nothing but professional every time he's been on this show. He's always been kind to everyone, from the host to the crew. He remembers people's names. He asks about their families. And today, you treated him like he was someone who wronged you personally. Why? What did he ever do to you? Savannah had no answer. She looked down at her desk, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling, avoiding eye contact with everyone around her. The silence stretched on uncomfortably. Craig leaned against the desk, his voice weary. I just don't understand the thought process. What were you hoping to accomplish? Did you think he was going to break down and admit to some scandal? Did you think you were going to get some big confession? Or did you just want to take down someone successful because you thought it would make good television? Still, Savannah remained silent. The defiance was gone, replaced by what looked like the beginning of realization, though whether it was true understanding or just recognition that she'd miscalculated was unclear. Hoda took a deep breath, her voice shaking slightly. We have a show to finish, but this conversation isn't over, not by a long shot. When we're off air, we're going to have a serious discussion about what happened here and what it means going forward. The segment producer's voice came through the earpieces, likely telling them they needed to go to commercial or move to the next segment. The hosts slowly moved back to their positions, but the atmosphere remained heavy and strained. Al attempted to inject some normalcy, though his voice lacked its usual warmth. Let's check in with the weather for the rest of the week. But even as he moved toward the weather screen, the weight of what had just transpired hung over the entire studio like a dark cloud. The crew members exchanged glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The producers surely knew they had just witnessed something that would be discussed and dissected for a long time. Back in the guest area, the chair where Samuel had sat remained empty, a stark reminder of the confrontation that had just unfolded. His microphone lay on the floor where he dropped it, another symbol of his justified exit. A production assistant eventually walked over and picked it up, handling it carefully as if it were evidence of a crime scene. Hoda glanced over at that empty chair, and you could see the emotion in her eyes again. She'd been part of many interviews over her years on Today, countless conversations with celebrities, politicians, and everyday heroes. But nothing like this. Nothing that felt so wrong and so avoidable. Nothing where a guest had been so thoroughly disrespected. Craig caught her look and nodded in understanding. They'd both tried to intervene, tried multiple times to steer things back to normal, but Savannah had been determined to push forward with her aggressive line of questioning. They'd been powerless to stop it, forced to watch as their colleague destroyed what should have been a pleasant interview. As the show attempted to continue, there was an unspoken acknowledgement among 3 of the 4 hosts that something fundamental had broken during that interview. Trust had been violated, not just with Samuel, but with the entire crew and potentially with their audience. Professional boundaries had been crossed in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. And a guest who should have been treated with respect and appreciation had instead been driven away by baseless accusations and hostile questioning. Savannah sat at the desk, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She made mechanical movements, looking at the camera when required, reading her lines from the teleprompter with none of the enthusiasm she'd displayed earlier. The confidence that had fueled her attack on Samuel was nowhere to be seen. Reality was setting in, slowly but surely. The other hosts wouldn't even look at her unless absolutely necessary. The cold shoulder from her colleagues was palpable and uncomfortable to witness. The viewers at home had witnessed something rare and deeply uncomfortable. Morning television is supposed to be light, informative, and welcoming. It's supposed to be a gentle way to start the day, with feel-good stories, helpful tips, and friendly conversations. What they'd just seen was none of those things. It was conflict, disrespect, and the complete breakdown of a professional interview into something ugly and unnecessary. It was the kind of television that makes viewers uncomfortable in their own homes, that makes them question whether they should keep watching. In the control room, producers were certainly making calls, trying to manage the situation, thinking about damage control and public relations strategies. But the damage was done. The interview had been broadcast live. Thousands, maybe millions of people had watched Samuel L. Jackson walk off the set of the Today Show, and he'd had every right to do so. No amount of spin could change what viewers had seen with their own eyes. The interview that should have been a straightforward promotional appearance, a simple conversation about his latest film project, had instead become a masterclass in how not to treat a guest. It would likely be studied in journalism schools as an example of what happens when an interviewer lets ego and aggression override professionalism and basic human decency. And the person responsible for it all sat at the desk, finally silent, while her co-hosts carried on around her with forced professionalism, doing their best to salvage what remained of the show. Al delivered his weather forecast with less energy than usual, his mind clearly elsewhere. Hoda introduced the next segment with a strained smile that didn't reach her eyes. Craig handled a transition with mechanical efficiency, and through it all, Savannah sat there, diminished, the weight of her actions finally beginning to register. The empty chair in the guest area remained a silent witness to everything that had transpired. A reminder that sometimes, in the pursuit of creating a moment, of making compelling television, of asking the tough questions, you can lose sight of basic respect and dignity. And when that happens, when you cross that line, there are consequences. Samuel, L. Jackson walking off that set was one such consequence, but the real consequences, the lasting ones, were only just beginning to unfold for everyone involved.